Welcome to the Rebel Justice Podcast. This week, we're honoured to speak with Malu Halasa, the editor and curator of the book Woman, Life, Freedom, a collective cry for justice in the pages of the anthology about Jina Mahsa Amini's death at the hands of Iran's morality police on the 16th of September 2022, which ignited a firestorm of protests that reverberated not only across Iran, but across the world. Women from all walks of life took to the streets, shedding their headscarves and boldly proclaiming Zan Zendegi Azadi in Persian or Jîyan Azadi in Kurdish. Translation: Woman, Life, Freedom. Halasa's anthology is a raw and unapologetic exploration of the extraordinary bravery exhibited by Iranian women in the face of oppressive laws and the relentless efforts to silence them. The anthology takes readers on a journey behind the scenes of forbidden fashion shows where women negotiate the risk of expressing their individuality.
So, Malu Halasa, welcome to the Rebel Justice Podcast. It is a real pleasure to have you on here to discuss your recently published anthology, Woman, Life, Freedom. I wanted to start with some of the themes that I was really fascinated by, and that was the theme of anonymity. So the beginning and the end of the book are anonymous letters from Tehran. And I wanted to talk more about the process of having your contributors, encouraging them to overcome their fear to publish their work in your book because of the danger associated with this anthology for Iranians.
There was a lot of danger associated with the anthology, especially for the writers who were living inside of Tehran. And perhaps as I was working on another kind of anthology that was not rooted in the Middle East or rooted in a religious totalitarian state, I would have worried more about anonymity. However, because when you're working with Iranians and because what they produce, whether art, music, literature, they can be arrested, or even they could have made movies for years and years and years, and then suddenly someone enters their house and stabs them in the neck. So anonymity was not really a problem for me. Also, because I had already done 2 books with Iranian topic matter, I had worked on an anthology called Transit Tehran, A Young Iran and Its Inspirations with Mazyar Bahari, who was a Newsweek reporter who in 2009 during the Green Movement had been arrested by the regime, and he spent 118 days in solitary confinement before they let him go. I knew many Iranian writers and artists through that book, but also because I'm close to Hengame Golestan, because I was the co-editor of a monograph on her husband, Kaveh Golestan. I also knew many photographers through working on that book. So people inside the country or in Tehran, they know my work. However, those books were done over a decade ago or longer. So some people were really coming to me, or I was approaching people and they didn't really know who I was. However, there were people inside Tehran who would vouch for me. And once people said, oh, I've worked with her before, then the people who didn't know me, they were more willing to work with me. And also the protests changed. There was a lot of demonstrations. There was a very angry response from the regime and a dangerous response from the regime from when the protests started on the 16th of September, 2022. Until the beginning of this year. And then it kind of became quieter. So I was worried that the people who said that they didn't want to be anonymous in the book, that they were willing to have their name published. I was worried that because things had been quieter when they had made that decision, that when things heated up, as they did in the spring, and now it's very dangerous for women to go without their hijab in Iran because of these draconian new laws, I was worried that people would regret that they weren't anonymous in the book. And I was talking to a translator who knows most of the contributors very well. And I expressed my fear of that to him. And he said to me that what I needed to understand was that Iranians are making these calculations every day. the political situation in the country changes moment to moment, so that people wouldn't have taken the decision lightly to use their names in the anthology, but they wouldn't feel so regretful.
Yeah, I really loved the story as well that you told when I came to you in Hatchards for your event there. And I really love the story of how you brought this anthology to one of your contributors to say, would you like to be a part of this? And she resisted initially. And then, I mean, if you want to speak more about
Well, this contributor is someone that I've been trying to work with for over a decade. And at various times, we've had projects together, but something's happened and those projects fell away. So this was someone I've been following their work and they've been following my work. And because of this person's situation, I knew that they wanted to be in the book, or they had talked to me about being in the book. But I also said to them that they really needed to see what was in the book and then they could make an informed decision. That was the most important thing for me, is that anyone who wanted to be in the book, of course, when you're an editor, you're gathering in material and you want the best material. And sometimes, the best material can fall through your fingers, like for whatever reason. But for her work, this person's work, I was keen to have it in, but I also knew that a decision had to be made and only that person could make it. So we met and I went through the book, and there was an image in the book that was upsetting, or not exactly upsetting, but this person thought it could cause a problem for them in the future. And that was probably like early on in the material I was showing this person, and I said, okay, but you can't make the decision yet.
Yeah.
You have to see all of the material and then you can make an informed decision. Because I find that with the Middle East, people make decisions very fast. They decide what's right, what's wrong. If they're in or they're out. Do they like to talk to somebody? They won't talk to them. And I kind of feel that in this day and age, you have to go a little bit slower. And then you can really make whatever decision you want to make. I'm not there to force anybody to do anything. And so by the end of showing all the material, this person said, no, I have to be in this book. I have to stand with the women. And I thought, okay, that shows the strength of the material. And that was important to me. That was important for me. I think it was one of the first times that I actually sat down with a possible contributor, and showed everything. Because it happened towards the end of the book. I had already gotten in a lot of material, and I was I think at that time deciding the order of the book, because we have over 31 contributors in terms of articles and stories, but then we have another 20 artists on top of that who contributed artwork to the book. So the order of the book, how you present the book, or the themes, how you introduce the themes, are very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, leading on from that, I loved the way that the personal stories were woven in with the artwork. So it had this very intimate sense throughout, that it was not just showcasing the beautiful and incredible work that is part of the resistance, but also personal stories that relate to, I loved the one on madness. That was very big Lale, little Lale. Yeah. That was a very powerful chapter. And these insights into Iranian life, and actually speaking of which, the anthology as well of Vali Maluji's essay. He discusses the movement's source of power. I love the quote, "The current movement is not from oppositional political mandates, foreign adversaries, or internal power struggles, but from individual citizens' civil acts of human pleasure and delight, dances, songs, kiss-ins, and liberally swaying bodies." And I wanted to discuss more about how Iranian bodies have shaped this revolution, and how this is also redefining the hero narrative, seeing women in everyday acts of resistance.
It was very interesting. I was talking to an Iranian social media editor at Radio Farda, and he was talking to me about how that, there's been a series of smaller demonstrations from 2017 onwards because of oil prices, gas prices. There were demonstrations by oil workers, retirees, teachers, at different times, smaller, much smaller demonstrations, but at different times. And he posed the question, were these protests or demonstrations, these smaller ones, sort of getting ready for the big one? And I was talking to Nahid Samandot, who's a cultural anthropologist. And I posed that question to her, and she said, oh, no, the woman life freedom protests, the revolution, the movement is really about the body and bodily pleasures. Like, people have been so pushed in their private lives to such a degree that their lives are controlled. They're breaking out from all of that. This isn't really a revolution that started because of oil prices or politics or an external foreign factor. This is something that's happening inside because of the body. And I think that the early protests, definitely, these protests would happen, or gatherings would happen quite spontaneously. And in some of the social media films from the time or videos of the time, you would see people dancing around fires. Or even later, you would have a line dance of people, of women dancing, and that would be their protest. Or even more recently, I think a month ago, there was a rollerblading protest through Tehran.
Incredible.
And it was like, you could see men in the cars filming the young women, and the young women on the streets without hijabs on their rollerblades, just like zipping around. And I think it's just very interesting that the focus is on the body, but not just the female body, the queer body.
Yeah.
The bodies of minorities. And I think this is what makes this revolution quite modern.
In the book, there were some writing on the intersectional solidarity between men in the streets and women not wearing a hijab, like men standing up for the women, or older women who dress tradition, with the hijab in that tradition, but they still stand in solidarity with the women life freedom protests. And
there's a Farnaz Hariri is a translator in Tehran, and she writes in the book about walking around a very busy square in the city, like one of the busiest, and she is harassed. They call her a slut because she doesn't have her headscarf on. And she, early on in the essay, she's like in the tube, in the metro, and she's wondering, this woman who's very traditionally dressed with a chador, so not just a hijab, a scarf on her hair, over her hair, but a chador, the whole thing, an abaya, the robe, the whole thing. And she's looking at the translator, and the translator's getting kind of worried, like, oh my God, what's this woman going to say to me? I'm not wearing a hijab. And the woman comes up, an older woman, and she asks directions. And the translator's kind of surprised by that. And then afterwards, the woman thanks the translator and says, be careful, my daughter. Because older women, whether they're wearing a hijab or they're not wearing a hijab, whether they're in chador, abaya, whatever, they feel solidarity with the young women. So you have that going on. But also another thing that I found really interesting, I don't know if you saw the video. I was very taken by this video. This happened earlier in the year. In Tehran, you have shops that sell yogurt. It's a busy shop. And two women, I wouldn't have even noticed myself that two women without a hijab walked into the shop. They walked into the shop. They're waiting in the queue. People are buying yogurt. They're buying yogurt like in jars or fresh yogurt, or, the Iranians are great yogurt eaters, as all Middle Easterners are.
Amazing.
And a man in a check shirt comes in, sees the women. There's some sort of exchange, because all this is being recorded on the shop's CCTV that's there, the film footage there. Some sort of exchange, but, the women are not fighting with him. It's not like a real angry exchange. The women just sort of like ignore him. And the man reaches out of camera, grabs some yogurt and throws it on the women. And so, there's yogurt in their hair. The man behind the counter jumps out from behind the counter, pushes the guy out of the shop. And I thought, oh, this is that finally we're seeing, we've heard stories of how men intervene. But now we're really we see it.
Mm.
And that was so interesting.
There was the cartoonist who did, I think, for the newspaper, did a cartoon.
Yeah, his name is Mana Nayastani.
Exactly.
And he's a editorial cartoonist.
Yeah.
He worked in Tehran, and he was targeted by the regime. They arrested him. I'm not sure of the timing of the arrest, but they warned him before they arrested him. They said, oh, you should, I don't know, something about, you should draw cockroaches, or you should draw, something for children. And so he drew something like a conversation with a mice or a cockroach, and he was immediately arrested. But they didn't keep him for too long. And as soon as he was let out, he left the country. So he works in Paris.
Ah, okay. And he continues to do cartoons of the Iranian.
Well, he's a Iranian editorial cartoonist. So what's going on in the country, he draws.
Okay.
And he works for Iran Wire, which is a very on-the-moment Iranian news and human rights website.
Yes, for everyone listening, I recently started following their work, and it is really brilliant from sort of pretty much front lines of what's going on in Iran. Actually, following on from this as well, I was thinking a lot about how this revolution is really redefining the Western concept of feminism and moving towards, which I've heard you say as well, Islamic feminism, and it isn't a separate concept. I mean, would you like to elaborate on that?
Well, I would say that there is an Islamic feminism that Muslim theorists have been putting out. And I think that the feminism that's going on for the woman life freedom movement is not necessarily that form of Muslim feminism that people like Ziba Mir Husseini has written about. I think that this feminism is, for better or for worse, a little bit more in the Western mode. It is about female choice or women's choice. And also it's a lot more open, I think, about people from different sexualities, different groups. They're very open about that. And that's why it is, I think that this kind of feminism coming out of Iran is making everybody rethink that feminism was only for white women. I think that the Iranian women are claiming feminism, a Western form of feminism, but making it their own. And the way that they're making it their own is that they put their bodies on the line. Now, if you're going out in Iran without a hijab, you get a few warnings. If they think that you're in cahoots with some foreign power that they don't like, they'll put you in jail for 10 years. So it is it's a feminism with consequences. It's not just about earning more money. It's actually about whether you can walk in the street, about public space, and if you can be there.
It feels more, my body, my choice, in the sense as well with like the Smarties was a good example of the chapter on women dyeing their hair bright colours in order to sort of, it wasn't even about necessarily a superficial thing. It was...
No, I think it was really about self-expression.
Yeah.
And also the Smarties, that was a photographic essay by Shiva Kademi, who is a magazine photographer in Tehran. She had come from Mashhad. Mashhad is like a 10th century religious city. And she had moved to Tehran for work. And she said in her essay, she talks about one of the first things she noticed about the city was all these women with very brightly colored hair. And that made them stand out. See, that's the thing that's sort of interesting, I think, about the anthology and about Iran. The things that we would take for granted in the West or in London.
Yeah.
If we saw somebody with pink hair, okay, we wouldn't even notice it really.
Yeah.
But in Iran, that's problematic. And these young women that Shiva saw, she kind of decided that she wanted to do a photographic essay with a series on them. And she would befriend them and hang out with them. And they were women who had stopped wearing the hijab as early as 2019. Okay. So they were kind of in the vanguard of woman life freedom, but they didn't know that they were in the vanguard. They knew that they wanted self-expression.
Yeah. So it's even identifying maybe with the revolution?
Just for those young women and their Generation Z, they had already had enough of being controlled. The Like they had already decided that they weren't going to go back to being controlled. And in what they talk about, we have captions for the photographs, and we say the names of the young women and their age, when they were born, the year they were born. And what they talk about is color. They have like a theoretical relationship with color. I like color because it makes me feel better. I like color to express myself. I want more color. It's not that they're like, oh, I'm dyeing my hair so I'm beautiful. It's more about this like deep meaning, or their personal relationship with color as a theory of manifesting itself in their lives.
I felt that even throughout a lot of the artwork. There were also a lot of illustrations, like digital illustrations. It was about like bringing strong amount of color. I mean, especially the illustrator who has a huge amount there was a selection of all red illustrations.
Oh, yeah.
That was really beautiful. I love
Mahsa Amini, yes.
And that symbolism, the red was a symbol of a sort of powerful, a power color.
Power color, but also in all of his posters have this red background. And he quotes Ferdowsi, who is, I think, a 10th century Iranian poet. Oh, my goodness, I should have looked it up before I came. But Ferdowsi wrote the Shamaneh. And it's very interesting that a young guy, a graphic designer in Iran, thinking about woman life freedom, a current movement, also couches it in poetry that almost all Iranians know.
Okay.
And can recite by heart.
Yeah, it's just sort of the Shakespeare of Iran.
Yeah, it's the Shakespeare of Iran. Yeah. So it's very interesting. And because Iran has such a deep, and long, and ancient visual culture and literature, poetry culture, the past is sort of always brought to the present and incorporated somehow in a lot of the artwork.
Thank you to Malu, and thank you to you for listening to Malu's extraordinary personal journey and how she's gathered together the stories of women across Iran to commemorate and celebrate the life of a young Iranian woman whose bravery is tattooed on all of our hearts. Check out our social media post with Malu's selection of artists and prose to find out more. Support The View by liking us on social media, subscribing to our quarterly magazine on our website, theviewmag.org.uk, and donating, sharing, and being part of our growing community wherever and however you can. Thank you.